Hey everyone, so this is part 3 and the final video of rendering this coffee cup. So now we're really just going to be focusing on some details. Let's start with the cup. So on the cup we're going to create a new layer and we're actually going to create a little bit of a highlight. Now I've shown you shapes, I've shown you the marquee tool. Now let me show you a little bit about the pen tool. When drawing with the pen tool, you need to make sure you check your settings. The first one here up here is path or shapes. If you choose a path, it's like drawing with vector in Illustrator with no stroke or no fill, and you'll have to apply this later. If you draw with a shape, it's like drawing in Illustrator with a fill. So I'm going to utilize the shape tool. This way I have my fill with white, which is what I want. On my layer 1, which I'm actually going to name Cup Highlight. With my pen tool selected, my shape selected, and my fill as white, I'm going to select the bottom of the cup where I want my highlight to start. Then I'm going to go up to my side here, click and pull to slightly mimic the curve of the cup. Then I'm going to hold down Alt. This is different from when you're used to drawing with Illustrator. You do not need to hold down Alt in order to convert your anchor points. So make sure you hold down Alt in order to get that half curve, half straight anchor. Then I'm going to choose a line here, and then I'm going to go down here and click and pull. Now that I have this made, I have a series of properties in which I can choose to adjust or change. For example, I want to feather this. So I'm going to feather my path so it's soft. Let's see here. This is kind of like dealing with a shadow, right? But it's dealing with a highlight. So anywhere from probably 7 to 12 would work. I'm going to check it out to see what I like. I'm going to do something around 9. Yeah. Okay, next what I'm going to do is I don't want this to be so harsh. I kind of want it to be harsher here and then fade away as it curves down. So I'm going to actually create a layer mask by selecting my icon, like the flag of Japan. Click that. Now nothing is on my mask yet. Okay, now unlike before where you've had a marquee selected and create a mask, this time I'm going to use the mask with a gradient. So I'm going to grab my gradient tool using black, which hides, white, which shows. I'm going to utilize my gradient. Choosing a linear version, black hides, white shows. With that true, then if I grab my black here at the bottom and I drag up to the top of my gradient, it will fade away, just like I want it. If you want to tweak or change this, you can also click and pull again, which creates it again. And you can mess with your opacity. If you want to just have a little bit of a highlight where it suggests the highlight but it's not overly powering. So you can choose to manipulate, change, and adjust this in any way or create multiple forms of highlights. Now that we have this created, we have learned some shadows, we learned some highlights, let's focus now on the coffee. So going to my coffee layer here, I'm going to start by creating a little bit of a gradient of what I want to see. So selecting my color with my eyedropper in my coffee, that set the tone for my foreground. And I'm going to select again, but this time I'm going to go up to a little bit of a brighter color. Hitting OK. Now I have my dark and light variation. With my gradient tool selected and making sure I have my transparency lock selected, I'm going to choose my reflective gradient. And again, I want my brightness on my left and my darkness on my right. So I'm going to reverse my gradient. Choosing the center of my form, I'm going to click, hold down Shift, and pull to my end. That should create a nice highlight in the center of my coffee. Once I have my coffee created, I need to work on some texture. So the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this layer. So I'm going to right click and choose duplicate layer. Now I'm going to name this coffee, and then I'm going to put texture because we're going to create some texture. Since we already have our foreground and background set in the color we want, go to Filter, go down to Render, and choose Clouds. If your clouds filled your entire page, not just the shape that we currently have selected, make sure you undo and check your transparency lock. We only want the clouds to render where the coffee currently sits. The next thing I want you to do is turn off the link between your mask and your thumbnail. We're going to create a little bit of a blur. But before we do that, let's duplicate the coffee texture layer one more time. So we're going to go to right click and we're going to choose duplicate layer. Now this is going to actually be coffee texture 2 because we're going to have two forms of this. Now we want to blur both of these in different levels. Making sure your transparency lock is off, go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Now for this one here, we'll go ahead and do 10. And then for this one here, this is coffee texture, not coffee texture 2. We're going to do half that by Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, but this time we're going to only do 5. That's 6. Now we're going to move a few of these. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to turn off my normal coffee layer by hiding my actual artwork. Then on my coffee texture 2, I'm going to shift it down. By using my arrow key on my keyboard, I'm going to go down just a little bit. On my coffee texture 2 layer, I'm going to drag it below my coffee texture layer so I can see the layers going through. And on this back one here, rather than normal, I'm going to change my normal to lighten. I'm going to change my normal to soft light. Then on my coffee texture layer, I'm going to choose lighten. Then on my coffee texture layer, I'm going to choose hard light. So you can see the two of them working together. Now on my coffee texture 2 layer, which is my outer blurry one, I'm actually going to pull it to my side. So I'm going to Control or Command T, and I'm going to pull it out by holding down Alt and just make it a little bit wider on my edge. I want it to wrap around my shape a little bit. And then on my coffee texture layer, again, I'm going to hit Command T, and I'm going to pull that one up just a smidge and over just a little bit. What I'm starting to do is create the depth of the side of the coffee. Now my coffee texture layer you can see underneath, I'm going to duplicate that one more time and see what I can do to make them react together. So on my coffee texture 2, I'm going to choose duplicate layer. I'm going to choose OK. I'm already liking what I'm seeing right there on the side, right there. See how it got a little darker, a little richer? Alright, now I'm going to take my original coffee layer and I'm going to drag it to the top. Now on this coffee layer here, since it's on the top, I'm going to go down and I'm going to choose soft light because I want to start seeing some of the coffee through it. Another thing I want to do is I want to slightly soften my edge. I don't want it quite this crisp. So I'm going to go and unlock my link between my mask and my thumbnail, and I'm going to soften my edge with a Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, but it's going to be really subtle, very, very subtle. I'm going to go down, making sure my transparency lock is off. I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to go down to probably very, very gentle amount here. Three it is. All right, we're already looking a little bit better here. So now I want to create the traditional highlight that happens on the top. So I'm going to create a new layer and I'm going to name this one Coffee Highlight. Now since I have my coffee right here, I'm going to go ahead and hit Command or Control and holding down that key on the keyboard, click with the mouse on the thumbnail below. Now you see this form. Now that I have my marquee selected, I actually want to move this down. So I'm going to grab my arrow key until I have it about what I want. Now I'm going to grab my gradient tool with black and white, and choosing the bottom of my coffee cup here, I'm going to hold down Shift and drag to the top here. And you can kind of see the black there. I can even go a little bit higher. Let's try that. That'll probably work. Now, deselecting, I would go to my coffee layer, select my mask, again holding down Command or Control to select the dancing ants, and then on my coffee highlight layer, choose mask. Now, just like I showed you earlier in one of the videos, that if you change your blending mode from normal to multiply, you hide white, but if you change your blending mode to screen, you hide black. So now all the black is hidden, but the white is showing. Then I can take my opacity and reduce it down, and it looks like a little highlight on top of my coffee. Now, one thing I would suggest is it's slightly weird on the sides, so I would unlink my mask between my artwork and my mask, and on my artwork layer, choose Controller Command T. Then I hold down Alt and pull my edge in a little bit, so that way I have a nice curve. And you have a little bit of a highlight on the top. Now let's do one more little wisp of a highlight. So we're going to create a new layer. Again, we're going to call this highlight. And I'm going to take my brush tool, and I actually want 100% opacity, but with my brush panel, you can click that here under brushes, or you can select a brush here. I actually want to select a brush here so I can adjust my spacing, my hardness, and my size. So I want a very small brush, but I want 0% hardness. And I'm getting a little bit bigger here. I also want this to be 100% white. Alright, once I'm ready, I'm going to go ahead and click my little button here to get my little hotspot. Now I have my highlight layer with my little hotspot. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. And what I'm going to do next is warp that little guy. So with my transformation tool, hitting Command or Control T, I'm going to choose Warp to get my little fishnet to change my mesh. So I'm going to pull my edge out here. I'm going to pull this edge out here. And I'm going to create a little bit of a wisp. Once I'm kind of happy here, I'm going to go ahead and choose OK. And then I'm going to zoom out, and you can see your little highlight. If you don't like how harsh the highlight is, you can also reduce the gradient as well, if you want a little bit less of one, by changing the opacity. One of the other little details is to kind of adjust the background so it's not a solid color. So going back to my original background here, I can actually create just a subtle change in gradient to create visual interest by using my color panel here. I can select my eyedropper here, grab my direct selection tool, and then just go just a hair darker. Not a lot, just a little small change. If I wanted a little bit more, I could do a smidge more, but I really wouldn't want to go any darker than that. Then with my gradient panel selected, making sure my foreground and background are chosen, making sure my reverse is off because I want my bright side on my top, And then go ahead and click and drag, holding down Shift to keep it nice and straight, and just create a little bit of depth. And if I want to, and I want to have a little tighter interest between the two, I can drag it just right where the coffee is, so I get a dark and a light little tone. My final little touch I would recommend is some smoke. So going back to my highlight layer, I'm going to create a new layer so I get one layer above, and I'm going to name this smoke. On this smoke layer, I'm going to select my black and white brush because I want just a white brush, and I want to do a really big brush. So opening my brush panels back up, I want to choose a very large size, 180 something. Yeah, 0% hardness and 0 or to 1% spacing. Then with making sure my opacity is set around 50%, I'm going to click and drag up and then drag up. Then I'm going to reduce my size and do it again. And then I'm going to reduce my size again. Alright, so now that I have this selected, I'm going to filter and I'm going to blur. So this is about 73.7 pixels. 73.7 pixels, roughly. So I can see my smoke layer. I'm going to duplicate it now. So I'm going to choose duplicate layer. I'm going to call this one smoke texture. Changing my black to a dark charcoal gray, I'm going to select my transparency lock and choose filter, render, clouds. And what this does will only put clouds where my current smoke is. Next, I want to change my blending mode to soft light so you can see the texture, but yet it's not overpowering. Now, below on my smoke layer, I'm going to go ahead and do a little warping. So I'm going to hit Command or Control T, and I'm going to warp my smoke. So grabbing my form out around my edge here. I'm just going to warp it a little bit here. Then I'm going to take my smoke texture and I'm going to warp that one too. And then choosing my warp feature. Alright, once I got a little bit of a wisp, now I can change the opacity for each one until I get the look I'm going for. Alright everyone, so that is rendering a coffee cup. See you next time. Bye.